You are listening to the continuation of the story. You can listen to the previous part via the link in the description below this video. Happy listening. The next morning, Chuck woke up with a clear plan in his head. He did not want to live alone in an apartment away from his sons, losing the opportunity to be with them, to see them grow, to participate in their lives. His deep love for his children and sense of duty forced him to seek a compromise that would allow him to remain close to them, but at the same time comply with all the legal restrictions imposed by the protective order. He could not violate the 300-meter distance established by this order, but he did not intend to go far from their lives. Feeling responsible for the future, he decided to act decisively. The first step was a conversation with Thomas Wilkes, his lawyer and old friend, who had helped him more than once in difficult life situations. They discussed the details of the plan, and Thomas agreed to help Chuck find suitable housing. Chuck then contacted the realtor, carefully explaining his goal of finding a home that would be within reasonable reach of his sons, but outside the off-limits zone. It needed to be a place where his children could easily come and visit him without having to rely on Bev to make their travel arrangements every time. Chuck wanted to maintain as much independence as possible in communicating with them. Luck was on his side. Soon the realtor found a house that was ideal for its location. It was close enough to Chuck's old house, but with an acceptable distance. The house was located in a cozy and quiet area on a fairly quiet street where the children could walk quietly and Bev could continue her normal life without feeling his constant presence. He could observe their lives from a distance but not disturb them. Without further delay, Chuck commissioned Thomas to make an offer to purchase, but he didn't stop there. To protect himself as much as possible from possible complications in the future, he asked the realtor and Thomas to meet with the owners of neighboring houses on both sides of Yeeling, the new home and behind it. This was a prudent move. He wanted to ensure that his surroundings would be calm and his neighbors loyal, which would reduce the risk of confrontations or unpleasant situations. Chuck understood how important stability was to him now. Within a few days, after a series of negotiations and approvals, the offer was so favorable that Chuck not only bought the house he wanted, but also purchased 2 adjacent plots. This decision gave him additional space and confidence that he could control his environment. Now he had the opportunity to build a new home and create a cozy refuge for himself and his sons, where they could feel free and safe despite the difficult relationship with Bev. The move symbolized a new beginning for Chuck, one that was quiet, thoughtful, and focused on his children's future, rather than his previous conflicts. This money seriously reduced the initial capital he received from the sale of his patent, but Thomas was in negotiations with other brands who were already showing great interest and discussing amounts of money, so any money invested in the house and outbuildings would be recouped in a few months. After the real estate purchase transaction was successfully completed, Chuck decided to take the next step to begin making his longtime dream come true. He contacted a famous architect with whom he had previously discussed the idea of a house when he and Bev were still living in peace and harmony. This was supposed to be the home they had once dreamed of together, full of luxury and comfort, but now he was building it on his own, with his own goals for the future. Chuck wanted the house to be large and spacious, with enough rooms for each of the boys to have their own private area. He wanted them to have their own space where they could feel comfortable and confident. Each of the sons had to have not just a place to sleep, but also an area for studying, playing, and relaxing. Chuck also had plans for a large family room where they could spend time together, play board games, or watch movies. He paid special attention to the premises for service personnel, which might be needed in the row. Chuck wanted to be able to call in nannies, housekeepers, or technical staff if the need arose. He wanted to create conditions under which the house would function as a coherent system, where everything was under control and in order. The garage, according to Chuck's plan, was to become a real masterpiece. He was a passionate car enthusiast and dreamed of owning a small collection of exclusive cars. Therefore, the garage was planned to be huge for several cars, with spacious. It was meant to be his personal relaxation and hobby area, something of a sanctuary for his passion. One of the key elements of the project was a swimming pool, which Chuck had long wanted to build. The pool was supposed to become not just a place for swimming, but a real recreation and entertainment. He imagined how the water would shimmer under the morning sun, and on cool evenings the house would protect him from the cold, creating an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility. Part of the pool had to be covered so that it could be used in winter or in bad weather, and the rest was outdoors where it could be enjoyed on warm summer days. The pool would also include a jacuzzi and several entertainment areas, a water park with slides, a grotto with a waterfall, creating the feeling of a resort ride at home. Chuck also insisted that the house have both indoor and outdoor basketball courts. This not only emphasized his love for sports, but also gave the children the opportunity to be active, train, and have fun. An enclosed area, ideally equipped for play at any time of the year, would become a popular place for both family, games, and meetings with friends. The house also had to have a huge media area, an entire floor dedicated to entertainment. Chuck envisioned a spacious room with massive sofas, a high-quality projector and sound system, where he could watch movies on the big screen in a real home theater atmosphere. There would also be play areas with the latest consoles and comfortable seating, creating an ideal environment for children and their friends. This house would truly be a dream come true. Everything in it had to be thought out to the smallest detail. A swimming pool that would combine spa, entertainment, and relaxation areas, grottos with waterfalls, would be a real pearl of the entire project. Chuck was ready to invest several million in this grandiose structure, to create a place that would become a home for him and his sons, where every corner would breathe comfort and luxury. Chuck wanted construction to begin as soon as possible. He had already envisioned an ideal future in his head, and he sought to bring this plan to life, creating not just a home, but a space that would be a new beginning for him and his family. A few weeks later, his life fell into routine. On Wednesdays, he visited his relatives, playing with the boys. He would then take them to his apartment or to some event, usually involving physical activity. The boys loved laser tag, so they went there at least once every 2 weeks and spent several hours of fun there. They ate good food and returned to their grandparents by 9 p.m. Chuck usually didn't stay long, as Bev would soon arrive to pick up the boys and take them home. William and Gail re-established a line of communication with their daughter, despite her betrayal. While they didn't forgive what she tried to do to Chuck, Gail in particular was able to put it behind her to allow Bev into her home again. William told his son-in-law that he still found it difficult to communicate with Bev, but he usually only had to talk to her for a few minutes on Wednesdays when she picked up the boys, as he was not at home when she dropped them off. He tolerated her on the weekends, when she picked up the boys after they spent time with Chuck, but usually she kept her head down and kept talking to a minimum. She sometimes talked to her mother on the phone. William also revealed through Gail that Darcy was now living with Bev. Somehow Darcy's parents found out about what had happened. Chuck denied that he had spoken to them and kicked her out of the house. Gail told Chuck that Darcy's parents had left an option for Darcy to return home if she refused to communicate with Bev, and broke off all ties with her. But Darcy was too passionate about Bev to understand her parents' reasoning. Chuck just nodded when he heard this. The boys had already informed him that Darcy was now living with them permanently and sleeping in their mother's bedroom. The boys were still quite naive and did not know about other details. At least Bev tried to keep her sexual preferences behind closed doors. Chuck shrugged. He thought that the boys probably already knew other children whose parents were same-sex, so it wouldn't be a big problem for them once they figured it out. Their main concern was still why he didn't live at home so they could be with him every day. And suddenly Darcy came to his office. Chuck decided to continue working so that Bev could not accuse him of hiding income if a divorce case was filed. Now he didn't have the stress of having to stick to a schedule, and he was more relaxed and surprisingly more productive for the company because he no longer had to work to a schedule. One afternoon, the secretary called him into the reception room to see a visitor. He was sure that Bev had violated the protection order, since he had not spoken to her directly since the incident at her parents' place. However, to his surprise, a nervous Darcy was waiting for him at the reception desk. Chuck decided to take her to a small conference room where all negotiations were automatically recorded, both audio and video. The company found that the number of contract conflicts was significantly reduced when video recordings clearly showed what was agreed upon. Video equipment, which was initially installed in offices to improve security and control workflow, soon began to be used for other purposes. After repeated cases of unethical behavior by some executives were exposed, cameras became a tool to enforce moral obligations in their contracts. The situation escalated when it became known that several high-ranking employees were using the company's conference rooms not for business meetings, but for secret meetings with secretaries. These violations could not remain without consequences. Following an internal investigation, most of the executives involved were immediately fired. Their contracts were terminated without any recommendations, which meant the end of their careers in that company and made it much more difficult to find a new job. The company's management did not want to put up with such behavior, and the incidents became a reminder of how important it is to comply with corporate and ethical standards. The company not only punished those responsible, but also did so in a demonstrative manner to demonstrate to other employees that it was serious about upholding moral standards. However, the consequences of this investigation were not limited to dismissals. Some wives learned of the existence of the videos and demanded them for use in divorce proceedings. These materials, documenting the unworthy behavior of their husbands, became powerful evidence in court, strengthening the position of the wives. Video recordings provided irrefutable evidence of infidelity, which made it much more difficult to defend the guilty spouses. Despite this, business owners have always refused to take any responsibility for the leaked videos. They publicly protested their innocence and claimed that the recordings were intended solely for internal use to ensure compliance with corporate regulations. They argued that they had no control over how the videos came into the wives' hands and that it happened without their knowledge or consent. This position allowed the company to maintain its reputation by distancing itself from the personal conflicts of employees and at the same time demonstrated a tough policy against those who violated corporate rules. Chuck believed that having video footage of any encounter with Bev or Darcy would protect him from being falsely accused of assault. He still didn't trust. "Well, Darcy, I see you still look good. Why did you come and what do you need?" Chuck wasn't going to be polite and tactful. Darcy was holding her phone and a small clutch. She fiddled with both objects nervously before she was finally able to speak. Clearing her throat, she spoke. "I came to ask you what you are going to do about your marriage to Bev. She's been worried for a while now. The boys miss you and so does she. Every day she talks about how you like your food to be prepared, how you want boys to behave, and even about how you made love to her." Chuck was surprised to say the least. Bev broke down in front of her parents and told them all that she wanted Darcy in her life and in her bed. She made it clear that she would never agree to share with Darcy. "She sent you. Is this an attempt to get me to cancel the protective order?" Darcy shook her head. "No, she didn't send me. She doesn't even know I'm here. I believe she completely understands why you ask for a protective order. And she has said many times that she was absolutely wrong in the way she made you aware of our relationship. Mr. Endo, I am very sorry for my role in this whole situation. I fell in love with your wife and then we began our affair. She makes me so happy that I can't even describe it properly. Now I have no relationship other than what I have with her and your boys. You've always been a good person as far as I can tell. I have always loved and respected you. I didn't want to do what Bev had planned that night, but I was so into her that I couldn't resist." She paused to see how he would take her words. "Now, I notice that sometimes she acts as if you are still at home. She suddenly starts talking about something you were discussing as if it happened yesterday instead of weeks or months ago. She bought a new razor like yours and put it on charge next to the brush you prefer. Your brand of deodorant is in the drawer she calls yours. She hasn't changed a single photo on the walls if you're in them. She really doesn't want me to say it, but she bought a camera with a long zoom and took photos of you and the boys in the park. They now hang on the walls of the house. Chuck was surprised. He always made sure to keep an eye out for Bev on his walks with the boys. But apparently he still didn't notice her. Why is she following me? I actually saw her a few times, when I came home from work on days when I didn't have boys. What is her intention? Darcy looked him straight in the eyes as if to emphasize that she was telling the truth. She's terribly afraid that you'll find someone else. She is constantly worried about you dating someone and having sex. Chuck snorted. What woman would want to be with me? I'm old, bald, and fat. I couldn't even keep my wife in my bed. She had to find a woman to satisfy her. Yeah, I obviously hang out in bars every night, looking for the next bitch to drug me with. Darcy shook her head. You don't see what the rest of the world sees. You're not even 40 yet, not 80. You lost 20 or 30 kilograms and got toned. Your bald head and beard suit you very well. And didn't you notice the looks your secretary gave me when you followed me out? I can only imagine how the women in your office will seek your attention when they find out you're single. She paused again. I always thought you were a good and attractive. When I first started babysitting your boys, I sometimes dreamed about you. I never fantasized about women until I got close to Bev. You were my fantasy lover. Chuck didn't believe a word she said. He never had any luck with women until he met Bev. He believed they were meant for each other. And that's how it ended. Darcy loved women, and he didn't believe for a moment that she had ever had any sexual thoughts about him or any other man. He could believe that she thought he was a good person, and we all know where the good guys go. What else do you have, Darcy? I don't have much time to listen to platitudes and lies. Darcy at least had the acting chops to look upset by his response. She straightened her shoulders and continued. I'm sorry that you don't believe me, but I'm telling the truth, and I want you to know that Bev misses you in her bed. She still loves you and suffers because you don't want to talk to her. For Chuck, it was becoming more and more like a new episode of The Twilight Zone. The woman who lied to him and started an affair with another woman who drugged him and then plotted to make his life a living hell by framing him for a crime, still loved him. The saddest part was that he still loved her, but he couldn't trust her, and she didn't do enough to give him peace of mind. You understand why a protective order was issued against her, right? This woman who claims to love me drugged me with a drug that could have killed me, and then tried to make the world believe that I had sex with you against your will. What will she do if I cancel this order? Will she invite me over and put a bullet in my head to get my inheritance? That would be her style, wouldn't it? She could make it sound like I was so miserable with my life falling apart that she decided to put me out of my misery. Then the agreement she signed would be void, and she could have sex with you or anyone else she liked without any consequences. Darcy had tears in her eyes when she tried to dissuade him from this. No. She doesn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to. She was assured that nothing would happen to you. She just wanted to get you to accept our relationship. She never wanted you to move out or lose touch with the boys. She just wanted you to let us see each other from. She still wants to have a fulfilling relationship with you if only you will forgive her and come home. Shaking his head became normal for Chuck on this strange day. He shook his head, again in disbelief. This conversation was going nowhere. Listen, I believe that you believe in this nonsense that you're talking about, but you cannot look into her soul. Somewhere she lost her sense of what was right and what was wrong, and I paid for it in full. She was going to deprive me of my sons, my marriage, my job, and any money from the patent. Maybe she would have let me back into the house, but I would have been under her complete control. Poor sex at times, and I would be forced to put up with her making love to you whenever she wants. This is not my type of marriage. Cheating on a person, whether with a man or a woman, is still cheating. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself so he wouldn't start screaming and bring other people into the conference room. Listen, if it makes you feel any better, you can tell her that since what she did to me, I don't think about sex at all. I don't dream about women, and I'm not looking for anything like that. Right now, I just want to find peace. I leave the city every other weekend to meditate in the Yo. Forrest, right now I have the same sexual desires as John. They just disappeared. So you and she can be proud of what you have achieved. Darcy was now crying openly. This whole situation has clearly destroyed this man. Apart from work and his sons, he no longer had any goal. She knew that nothing she said would help him heal, so she stood up to leave. Touching the doorknob with her hand, she stopped. I know an apology can't fix everything, but I'm really sorry that I hurt you. When I tell Bev, she will be even more devastated. This was never her goal. And by the way, John's birthday is coming up. He told us that the only thing he wants is for you and Bev to be together for his birthday. I was hoping you could suspend the protective order for this day so he could get his wish. Chuck completely forgot about his upcoming birthday. Jeff's birthday was in a month or so, and he suspected he would probably have the same wish. He stopped Darcy for a moment. I will ask that the order be suspended for a short time. How about meeting in a neutral place, such as a children's play center, a restaurant, or even Bev's parents? I would feel more relaxed there than at your home. It's too early for me to feel comfortable in that house. Darcy nodded. I know it's a lot to ask, but would you consider staying with Bev for the night? I can take care of the boys. I'd like for you and Bev to spend some time alone. Maybe even make love or even just hook up for old time's sake. If you don't feel safe in your home, take her with you to a motel or even your apartment. Release your anger. I may not be very wise, but I know that if you don't do something about that rage, it will eat you up from the inside. No promises, but I will think about your request. It might be better if Bev talks to me when I hide. Suspend the warrant, but at the same time, don't put pressure on me. Give me time to think it over. Darcy nodded and left the room. Chuck sat in deep thought for a few more minutes before returning to his desk. On the way, he noticed that some of the women he met along the way seemed to follow him with their eyes as he passed by. It warmed his soul a little, knowing that perhaps there was more to the world than just pity. After lunch, he received a call from the local planning office. Chuck and Thomas Wilkes were invited to a meeting regarding his home project. This was a little strange, since they believed that their request for a new home met the city's residential building codes. The members of the Planning Commission were a mixture of professionals such as lawyers and architects, good citizens, and city council members. They were all present when Chuck and Thomas entered the room. When Chuck asked about their plans to develop the land, he was surprised by their answer. The chairman of the commission, a man in his mid-60s with gray hair and piercing eyes, rose slowly from his seat, coughing slightly to attract comment. Silence reigned in the hall when he took the floor. Mr. Endo, he began with a neutral but noticeably formal intonation. Your company, RM Industries, has submitted an unusual request for the construction of a rather large house on 2 adjacent plots. This includes a large swimming pool, a multi-car garage, and a variety of sports facilities in an area that, frankly, has been struggling for a long time. His voice sounded with a slight note of doubt, and his gaze briefly touched the papers lying on the table in front of him. In this area, as you may know, there have been no new developments for several years. Most of the houses here are old, small, one-story bungalows with 2 or 3 bedrooms built back in the late 1940s, when the city was going through a different phase of its development. He paused for a moment to let Chuck process what he had just said, and then continued. Most people who can afford houses like your project prefer to build them in the suburbs, where there are more spacious plots and modern infrastructure. Here, frankly speaking, everything looks different. Old houses, which are often poorly maintained, are gradually deteriorating, and some are in need of renovation for a long time. Few people decide to invest in this area. The chairman paused to emphasize the contrast between their vision for the area and Chuck's ambitious plans. Therefore, it is somewhat difficult for us to understand why you chose this particular place for such a significant project. Can you explain to the commission why you decided to build here and not in a new developing area of the city? He finished, tilting his head slightly and looking carefully at Chuck. All eyes in the room turned to Chuck, waiting for his answer. The soft noise of the air conditioner and the occasional rustle of paper emphasized the tension of the moment. The commission wanted to hear the motives behind this unexpected choice and to justify why such A large and expensive building could fit into the appearance of an old area that had long lost its former attractiveness. Thomas, an experienced lawyer with many years of practice, spoke with the composure and confidence of a man accustomed to defending the interests of his clients in the most difficult situations. He stood up and bowed slightly to the chairman and then began his speech, clearly and without excessive emotion. "Dear members of the committee," he began, "first of all, let me clarify that my client, Mr. Endo, is a major shareholder of RM Industries. But his current assets are invested in a business that has not yet reached full profitability. The invested funds provide development prospects, but at the moment they are not available for personal needs. Thus, its resources for private construction are limited, which makes this project strategically important. It was carefully designed to suit not only his personal needs, but also the circumstances of his life." Thomas paused, allowing the panel to focus on what he had to say next. He came to the most important part of his speech, the reasons why Chuck chose this particular area to build. As you know, Chuck experienced estrangement in his family relationships, especially with Bev, his ex-wife. Due to legal obligations and a protection order that prohibits him from coming within 300 meters of her, he is forced to find accommodation on the edge of these restrictions. However, his desire as a father is to remain close enough to his sons, to maintain contact with them and ensure their well-being. This home will allow the boys to be free to visit their father without having to rely on their mother to make travel arrangements. He will create a safe and comfortable place for them where they can spend time whenever they want. Thomas emphasizing the importance of Chuck's care for children. He continued by pointing out the advantages of a large house and its layout. A spacious swimming pool and additional play areas will give boys and their friends the opportunity to have fun and spend time in the fresh air. This is not just a luxury, it is an important element in allowing children to grow up in a healthy and active environment where they can be free and happy. Thus, this project is aimed at creating family comfort and support, despite difficult circumstances. After his words, a tense silence hung in the hall for a moment. However, the chairman of the commission, noticing the interest of some members, asked the question that was probably on everyone's mind: "What are the chances that you and Bev will make up, Mr. Endo, in case of reconciliation? Will there still be a need for this house?" Chuck himself took the floor, reservedly but firmly. He stood up, clasped his hands in front of him, and addressed everyone present. "The chances of reconciliation are extremely small," he admitted calmly, but the weight of the past years and disappointments was felt in his voice. "We have been through too much, and our marriage, unfortunately, is unlikely to be able to recover. Even if by some miracle this happens, which I highly doubt, this house will remain an important part of our lives. If we get together, perhaps we will live here in this big house, and it will be a place of new hope and stability for us and our children." His words evoked silent understanding in the hall. The commission felt that the house in question was not just a luxury project, but a necessity for Chuck so that he could continue to be a part of his sons' lives, despite all the obstacles that came along the way. One of the commission members, an elderly man with a serious expression on his face, raised his hand and asked a question that clearly worried many of those present. "Mr. Endo, what is planned to be done with the existing houses on these sites? Although they are small, they are well built, and it would be a shame to simply demolish them for new construction. These houses could be used by families who find it difficult to afford anything more." Chuck thought for a moment. He knew that these houses, although old, represented something more to the community. Each of them had its own history, and destroying them just like that would be a truly reckless decision. He and Thomas exchanged brief glances and quietly began discussing their options, quickly weighing the pros and cons. Thomas, who had always been renowned for his operational savvy, suddenly had an idea. He leaned slightly towards Chuck and whispered, "What if we offered to donate these houses to Habitat for Humanity and pay for their removal? This could save homes and benefit the community." Chuck nodded, realizing that not only would this solve the problem with the houses, but it would also show his desire to make a positive contribution to an area that had been in need of support for a long time. He straightened up and turning to the members of the commission, voiced a proposal. Thomas and I discussed a possible solution. Instead of demolishing the houses, we are ready to donate them to Habitat for Humanity and cover all the costs of moving them. This will save buildings and give them to those who really need them. The commission paused for a moment in surprise, realizing how unexpected but elegant this decision was. It suited everyone. The houses would be preserved, and at the same time, the new owners would be able to get housing thanks to the charitable organization. There was a murmur of approval in the hall, and several members of the commission looked at each other, nodding to each other. The chairman, holding back a slight smile, said, "This proposal, Mr. Endo, suits everyone. We thank you for your understanding and concern for the community. I think this issue can be considered closed." With these words, the tension in the hall visibly subsided and the atmosphere softened. The decision to transfer the houses into good hands not only solved a practical problem, but also showed Chuck at his best as a person who is willing to think not only about his own interests, but also about the future of the area and its residents. The chairman, still maintaining formality but with a degree of frankness in his voice, decided to express the commission's opinion on Chuck's project. He sighed and, slightly pushing his glasses up his nose, said, "Mr. Endo, you probably understand that our city budget, to put it mildly, is always on the brink. We struggle to maintain infrastructure while also paying for police, fire, and other emergency services. The reality is that there is never enough money for everything you need. The area where you're going to build is quite old. There are no large parks, sports complexes, or other amenities other than sidewalks and roads. The nearest park with a swimming pool is 2 miles away, which is clearly inconvenient for local residents. Children here often play right on the streets, since they have no other places to play. This leads to accidents, and unfortunately, such accidents happen more often than we would like." He paused, looking at Chuck as if he was trying to convey that this was a problem that shouldn't be ignored. "Your pool, Mr. Endo," the chairman continued, bowing his head slightly, "will become a kind of magnet for children from the neighborhood. We understand that you are planning to create a great place for your sons, but this pool will inevitably attract the attention of other children who will be looking for opportunities to play and cool off in the summer. We want to know if you took this factor into account when you conceived your project." Chuck, listening to the chairman, already knew about the problems in this area. This was not news to him. He and Bev had discussed this at one time when they were choosing a house for their family. At that time, they were limited in funds and therefore agreed to a compromise, choosing a house in an old area where the infrastructure left much to be desired. They knew that amenities such as parks and swimming pools were too far away, which created some difficulties. When they were still together and discussing building a new home, their plans included moving to a gated community where the children would have all the necessary conditions for safe rest and play. However, the events that happened later radically changed his plans. Now faced with new life circumstances, Chuck decided to build here, not far from his previous home, in order to be close to his sons. He nodded, acknowledging the seriousness of the issue raised by the commission. "Yes, I understand what you're talking about," Chuck said calmly and confidently. "Bev and I were aware of this problem when we bought our previous home. Unfortunately, at that time, we could not afford anything better and made a compromise. Now the situation has changed, and I want to create a place where my sons can feel safe. I also understand that my pool may attract the attention of other children, and am willing to consider measures to control access to it to avoid accidents. It is important that everything is organized in such a way that the place remains safe for everyone." His words resonated with the commission members. Chuck not only demonstrated that he had considered all possible consequences, but was also willing to take responsibility for solving them. Chuck, holding back his emotions, asked a direct question, feeling some internal tension from the sudden turn of the discussion. "So you want me to remove the pool from the plans?" The chairman looked a little embarrassed at the suggestion for a moment. He quickly recovered and explained his position with a good-natured smile. "Actually, no, we don't want to. We understand the importance of your project to your family. Instead, we have another proposal, perhaps even more ambitious. we would like to ask you one big favor. The chairman picked up the large sheets of papers lying in front of him and revealed a new plan. Have you considered the possibility of buying out the rest of the block and expanding your project for a swimming pool? The commission members began to stir, and an atmosphere of curiosity hung in the air. Chuck and Thomas looked at each other in surprise. This was not at all what they expected. The chairman continued, slowly unfolding a map of the neighborhood on the large table in front of them. We have been working with individuals and companies for some time to create public parks, which are subsequently transferred to the city for management and maintenance. As you may know, the area has been lacking places like this for a long time, and we see this as an opportunity. Your pool, like this whole idea, could be the centerpiece of a new park that could attract young families with children. This could breathe new life into the area. Chuck carefully studied the proposed plan that the chairman laid out in front of him. In the diagram, his house was moved to the center of the block, surrounded by spacious green areas. There were parking spaces on either side of the house, providing access to an even larger pool, which was significantly larger than the original design. Comfortable recreation areas for children and adults have appeared along its borders. On one of the corners of the block, the chairman pointed his finger at the plan. There is a children's playground with a splash pad fountain, which will undoubtedly appeal to young families, and next to it is a play area with a variety of equipment for active games. Your pool will be expanded and will have a separate entrance on the opposite side of the block. Here he pointed to one area of the plan. There's a building with changing rooms and a small concession stand that will be available to both pool users and those on the playground and splash pad. Chuck noticed that despite the proposed changes, his house still remained at the center of the entire project, occupying a dominant position, towering over the new quarter, like the core of the entire structure. It would still be his personal home, but now it would become part of something larger, a neighborhood with a park, where life would be in full swing. The chairman also added, "We tried to take into account the balance between green areas and parking." Here he pointed to another corner of the plan. Green islands will be created to soften the visual impact of the parking spaces. The home you have in mind will dominate the neighborhood, standing out from it all. But at the same time, you can be the one to give the area new life. Chuck silently considered the proposed plan, realizing that his project could turn from a personal dream into something much bigger, an opportunity to change an entire neighborhood and create a space that would benefit not only his family, but also the people around him. Chuck was impressed. Thomas asked the obvious question of whether Chuck's original design would be approved or if the pool would be dropped if he didn't agree to the expansion. The chairman was a real politician. We would have serious doubts if we recommended your original plan to the city council, but if this is a proposed park, then I believe that the entire council will unanimously approve the project. If you need additional funding, there are a number of private funds that can help with development costs that the city has limited access to. We're confident there will be minimal resistance to the city taking over management of the park, but it's okay to make sure taxpayers feel like we're being a responsible steward of their money. Chuck was starting to like this idea. The park was really needed in the area, and the kids had little to no access to the pool. If the city manages the park, it won't have to worry about safety and risks. What if I want to use the pool myself? So I won't have access to it if the city runs it. The chairman was clearly pleased by this question. I think we can find a compromise. We could make the pool private in the evenings for you and your family. Your family won't have to pay the regular cost and will be able to have access to the pool right from home if you want. We also noticed that you wanted an indoor pool that could be separated from the outside, and this is entirely possible if you wish. The only difficulty may arise in winter when the outdoor pool is closed to the public. What about the planned spa area with a jacuzzi? And what about the waterfall and grotto I originally planned? I see that the water slide is still in the project. We believe that the spa and jacuzzi area may be fenced off for your personal use. The waterfall remains in the project, but we believe the city will face safety issues due to the grotto, It will be difficult for rescuers to constantly see what is happening in this area. They negotiated for some more time. Chuck added an 8-foot fence around the entire pool, something that has not been done at any other public pool in the area. He also added a metal canopy along the entire west side of the pool so beachgoers could choose to be in the sun or shade. The plan also included rearranging other houses on the block. Chuck agreed with this point without difficulty. It might take a little longer, but he won't have to pay high demolition fees for demolition debris, just the underground structures and garages that will remain. When Chuck and Thomas left the commission building, both of them had a look of satisfaction on their faces. The sun's rays played welcomingly on the glass walls of the building, as if emphasizing that they were leaving this place with a clear plan and confidence in the future. Their proposal to transform the entire block into a park centered on Chuck's house was accepted with approval, and now new horizons opened up before them. Of course, this will take more money out of Chuck's financial reserves than he originally planned. But by looking at the situation through a long-term lens, he knew the investment would pay off. With a new project on the horizon and RM Industries contracts in place, he had reason to believe that the project would be feasible. The project was reshaping not only his home, but the future of a neighborhood that had long been in need of change. Thomas, as always, was full of ideas. On the way to the car, he began to think out loud about financing options. I will explore the possibility of receiving grants from various foundations. There are many organizations that support urban revitalization projects and the development of public parks. If we can attract such funds, it will significantly reduce the costs of the project and allow us to move forward faster. Chuck nodded approvingly, already making plans in his head for the next step. On the way, he took out his phone and contacted his realtor, giving him clear instructions. The task was difficult, but doable. Buy out the remaining part of the block. We need to act quickly and efficiently, Chuck said over the phone, his voice sounding confident. Offer all homeowners 3 options. First, a full buyout at market value or above market value. The second is the relocation of their home to a new site at the expense of RM Industries to preserve their property. And third, the opportunity to purchase a townhouse at a reasonable price. We must give people choices that show our respect for them and their property. The realtor quickly agreed, realizing that he had an important mission. And don't forget to tell them the full plan for the park. Chuck added, putting the phone on speaker so Thomas could hear, too. We need all residents to know that they are not just part of the deal. Their contributions will be immortalized. Every homeowner who agrees to our terms will be included on the memorial plaque in the park as a donor. Their names will be carved in stone as a symbol of their participation in the transformation of the area. The idea of a plaque with the names of the old residents of the block seemed great to both of them. It was a gesture of respect to those who had lived in the area for a long time, giving the project more significance than just redevelopment. Suddenly, they realized that they were creating something more than just a residential area with a park. It was a true renaissance of the community, both for those who lived here and for future generations. The moment Thomas' car pulled out onto the street, they both knew they had a huge job ahead of them. But the future looked bright and full of possibilities. Negotiations will take some time, several months in fact. Some elderly homeowners were not opposed to selling, but did not have the funds to move into nursing homes. RM Industries then created a nonprofit foundation to raise money from other foundations and help homeowners with their living expenses. Construction began on lots vacated when homes were moved to a new Habitat for Humanity block a few miles away. Chuck also helped with the costs of the lots and foundations for these homes. John's long-awaited birthday had arrived, and preparations for the holiday were in full swing. It was decided to celebrate it in the cozy home of the grandparents in order to create an atmosphere of family unity and give all relatives, including both sides of the family, the opportunity to take part in the celebration. The house, surrounded by an old garden with flowering flower beds and a wide lawn, was the ideal location for such an event. Inside, the aroma of freshly baked pies and holiday snacks filled the space, creating a feeling of homeliness and warmth. Garlands, colorful balloons, and children's toys were scattered around the living room, ready for guests to arrive. However, behind the external joy of the day, there were important and serious decisions regarding the relationship between Chuck and Bev. Thomas, acting as a liaison between them, notified Bev in advance of important changes. He told her that the protective order that barred Chuck from approaching her had been suspended this time permanently. This decision was a kind of step towards the final resolution of their conflicts. But it was also conditional. Chuck is ready to leave everything in the past and move on. Thomas explained restrainedly but firmly, but there is one important condition. If Bev does anything that makes Chuck feel a threat to himself or their children, he will immediately seek reinstatement of the protective order. And this time, evidence of her behavior will not just be passed on to family friends, as was the case with Mark and Terry Jenkins, but straight to the police. Bev, listening to this, realized that the situation had changed. Previously, she could count on some patience and gentleness from Chuck, but now he was firm and ready to protect himself and his family by any means necessary. Thomas made it clear that if there were violations, the district attorney could consider filing charges against her. "This is serious, Bev," Thomas continued, looking her straight in the eyes. "Chuck wants peace, but he doesn't hesitate to act if something goes wrong." Surprisingly, Bev, who might have reacted with resistance before, agreed without hesitation this time. She willingly accepted the terms, understanding that her actions would now be closely monitored and sake of the children and the continued well-being of the family. Although her view of these conditions was still shadowed by regret for what had happened in the past. When all these important points were discussed and settled, John's birthday began with festive fun. The children laughed and played on the street, and the adults, although they felt slight tension due to previous events, tried not to show it and paid all their attention to the birthday boy. Chuck and Bev kept their distance from each other, but it was no longer a cold barrier, but rather a cautious understanding that the peace and stability they so desired could only be achieved through clear boundaries and mutual respect. John was beaming with happiness, surrounded by family and friends, and the day went smoothly without any untoward incidents. For the first time in a long time, it seemed that the family was able to find at least some kind of balance, albeit with a number of reservations and conditions. The holiday went off without a hitch. Chuck rented a trampoline for the kids and a tent for the yard. Parents were invited to stay with their children for the celebration. Some adults were offered alcoholic drinks, while children enjoyed sweets. Chuck gave his son a radio-controlled car, and Jeff was already looking forward to getting one for his birthday, and the brothers playfully argued about who would drive the car in the driveway. Bev tried to act flirtatiously, trying to attract her husband's attention. Darcy stayed in the background and simply played the role of nanny, as Bev introduced her to all strangers. Some men who were unaware of the situation in the Endo family quietly remarked that Chuck was lucky to live with such a beautiful wife and hot nanny. Chuck just smiled and did not express any of his thoughts out loud. It was a 9-year-old's birthday, and no dirty details needed to be revealed. One of the highlights for the adults was Chuck's presentation of his plans for the park. The project had already been hinted at in the newspaper, but no official announcement had been made. Chuck commissioned an architect to modify the home's original layout, adding nearly 10-foot ceilings and changes to the wiring and plumbing, so that when Chuck finished using the house, it could easily be converted into a community building. Bev was as surprised as everyone else when she learned of the plans for the park and its location. She immediately understood why a distance had been left between her house and the park. She looked at her husband questioningly, but he only smiled reassuringly at her and wordlessly promised to explain everything later. Everyone in attendance congratulated Bev and Chuck on their ability to make such a charitable contribution that would benefit the entire city. Some asked if they could contribute in any way since they lived in the area. Chuck made it clear that the park would need labor to build certain facilities unless someone could donate money. All in all, it was a good day. Chuck and Bev were able to put their differences aside for John's sake and enjoy the day, if not for their own sake, then for everyone else's. Even William was able to be polite to his daughter, and did not show his displeasure like the owner of the house without kicking Darcy out of the holiday. After the last child and his parents left, the Willis family served sandwiches and drinks to Chuck, Bev, and Darcy. The boys were already starting to fall asleep after a day full of fun, so Darcy volunteered to take them home and put them to bed. Nobody objected. After Darcy left with the boys, Bev sat next to her parents and husband and asked a few more questions about the park. One of them concerned financing. This was the only moment that darkened the day a little. Where does all the money for this come from? It's a great idea, and the whole neighborhood will be, but how much does it cost? She looked at her husband. I was under the impression that you didn't make much profit from selling your invention. Am I wrong? Chuck shrugged. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I don't have much money. I have not received a promotion at my day job and have additional expenses associated with maintaining a separate home. He immediately raised his hand to stop her objections. Yes, I know it's my fault and I could change everything at any moment, but that's not what you're asking. Bev relaxed a little, leaning back in her chair. In fact, this project, which I am involved in on the side, RM Industries, is financing the construction. A significant portion of the startup capital was transferred to a non-profit foundation to support this project. Applications have also been submitted for other grants to help cover overall costs. The city will pay for the management of the park. Relocated homeowners also participate in the financing. Their homes are being moved to new sites, some of which will become Habitat for Humanity homes, while others will be reoccupied by their original owners. These negotiations are still ongoing, so this cannot be discussed publicly yet. I ask you to keep this a secret. I assume that the park will be built in stages. The house is already in the final stages of planning, and contracts will be signed soon. The owner will be RM Industries, and I will be renting the house from them. Then a swimming pool with a private fence and a building for changing rooms will be built. Then there will be parking areas followed by a playground and splash pad area. It will take several years to complete all the work. I hope the house will be ready in about 8 months, but we'll see. In addition, the garage occupies a huge area. When all the questions were answered, Bev asked Chuck to take her home since Darcy had taken her car. Chuck agreed and they left Willis's house. He knew that Gail at least hoped for their reconciliation. He didn't talk to William about his feelings. It was already dark outside when they got into the car, but it wasn't so dark that Chuck didn't notice that Bev had taken off her bra after the boys left. Her blouse was unbuttoned so much that with every movement her curvy figure was visible. She took his hand, feeling how cold it was, and remarked out loud, "You're so cold." Chuck had a hard time refraining from making a barb. They had to work to find some kind of mutual understanding. If he continues to reject all her attempts to get closer, nothing will change, but he just couldn't trust her. They drove to Bev's house. Chuck no longer considered this house his own. Most of his belongings, including his tools, lawnmower, gun safe, and its contents were still there, but he didn't consider the house his own after what happened there. He tried to think about something brighter, remember better times in order to somehow change his mood. Bev sensed his mood and tried to cheer, but had limited success. Finally, she asked him to stop. They drove past an abandoned store, and Chuck parked in the lot just off the road under a streetlight. The lamp illuminated the interior of the car when he turned off the engine. She didn't let go of his hand when he tried to pull it out of her warm palm. "No, I haven't touched you for months. The last time I touched you, I destroyed you and our relationship so much that it may not survive. I should try to make things right if I can. Now it is my responsibility to take the first step, the second, and perhaps all the others in order to establish something. It seems to me that the closer we get to home, the worse it gets. So I suggest going somewhere else." "What do you say to this?" Chuck nodded. He felt the same. The closer he got to the house where the disaster occurred, the less he wanted to deal with Bev. The only good thing about him being in this house was his sons. He started the car and turned around, driving to the 24-hour cafe. They sat down on a sofa in the corner side by side and ordered coffee and a piece of pie. After the waitress took her order and left the table, Bev noticed that she was looking at Chuck with interest. Chuck chuckled. He knew better. Nobody is interested in him sexually, except maybe the one who was sitting next to, although he doubted it, since she could satisfy her carnal desires as many times as she wanted since all this began. She didn't need him. The boy's education was insured. She knew that. She paid the mortgage and utility bills with a little help from him, and Chuck knew that too. Bev had lost a little weight, but he didn't believe it was from hunger. Chuck also lost a few pounds, and it wasn't because he skipped meals. He simply began to eat healthier and assumed that Bev was doing the same. The boys mentioned that in the past few months, both parents had stopped by for fast food significantly less frequently. Bev held his hand in hers, except when they tried to eat a piece of pie. Both were right-handed, so one had to let go of his hand to pick up the fork. Their conversation was strained and hesitant at best. It was almost as if they were strangers to each other, and because of what Bev did, they pretty much became that way. Changes have occurred in each of them. Finally, Bev turned to Chuck and extended her right hand. "My name is Beverly Willis Endo. Nice to meet you. My friends call me Bev. I rarely respond to my full name." Chuck couldn't help but smile. She was clearly starting over from scratch. "How are you doing? My name is Charles Endo. My friends call me Chuck. Can I call you Chuck?" "Well, if you don't, I'll think that either you're a stranger to me or you're mad at me. Usually only. In such cases, my name is Charles. I'll try to remember this and be careful. I hope you never hear me." "Call you Charles," then she continued. "I know it sounds corny, but do you come here often?" "Well, I like their pie, so I stop by sometimes. And you?" "I like their pie too, but I don't come here very often." Today was a rare occasion. The conversation continued in the same vein. They tried to find common themes. Over the next hour, they reconnected with what they liked together and discussed what turned them off or disliked them. Comments about current relationships were avoided. By the end of the hour, they were laughing at each other's jokes and funny stories. Their coffee cups were empty, and the cake had long since been eaten. Finally, Bev turned to Chuck. "Do you have plans for the rest of the evening?" "I'm usually not that brave, but I would like to get to know you better. Can we go to your place, or do you have a flatmate?" "No, I live alone. I think it would be good to continue getting to know each other and see if we are right for each go." They left the table and left a good tip for the waitress. They drove to the apartment complex where Chuck lived. Bev noted that the building was impressive. Chuck lived on the 12th floor and the elevator moved quickly. The elevator was also spacious and had mirrored walls. Bev thought it would be a great place for sex if the doors weren't constantly opening and closing. Chuck smiled, understanding what she was hinting at. When they reached Chuck's door, he opened it with grace. Due to its modest furnishings, the apartment seemed clean and tidy. They stopped in the living room and shared their first kiss. Soon Chuck took Bev to the couch for some kissing. They tried to have sex, but Chuck didn't succeed because he kept mentally comparing himself to Darcy. He satisfied her needs, and when she fell asleep, he covered her with a blanket and went to the second bedroom where he collapsed on one of the two beds, after which he locked the door. He spent several hours staring at the ceiling before falling into a restless sleep. The next morning, he woke up with a stiff neck from the small pillow Jeff usually used. It wasn't comfortable enough for his type of sleeper. It was a good thing that Bev was going to come home today so he could sleep in his own bed again. He stood up, took a few pills for the pain in his neck, then went to the bathroom, emptied his bladder, and completely naked, headed to the kitchen to make coffee. He heard Bev's phone ring and decided to listen in on her conversation. As he expected, Darcy called and she asked how it went. Bev honestly said that they had coffee and had a good time reconnecting, but that the lovemaking was weak and nothing. He didn't even try to have sex with me. And then I woke up in the morning alone in bed. It didn't work out the way we wanted, honey. She really looked sad as she said those words. Chuck looked at her reflection in the mirror above the dresser. He shook his head and entered the bedroom. He needed to get dressed to take her home. He ignored the fact that she was still talking to her friend and lover. Why didn't she just file for divorce and marry this girl? Why did she even try to maintain any relationship after what she did? Maybe he should have asked. He got dressed, didn't shave, and didn't shower. It was a day off, and he was planning to go out of town later. The National Forest called to him to find peace of mind there. Bev ended the call and started getting dressed. They met in the kitchen over a cup of coffee. Chuck decided to start the conversation first. I have no doubt that last night was a failure on several levels. I hope you won't deny it and will be honest with me. Bev nodded slowly. He sighed heavily. Why did you even start this yesterday? Other than for your own peace of mind, I don't understand why you did all this. Darcy talked to you into trying to get us together again. Bev looked sad. I wanted my husband back. I hurt you terribly and I wanted to somehow fix it. I want us to be lovers and full-time parents to our boys again. Even though sex with Darcy is very good and satisfying, I wanted to be with you again. This is something that no one else can give. Darcy insisted a little on this. When I was depressed and very worried about our future, she insisted that we try to repair our relationship. I have to ask about this. If you love her so much, why don't you divorce me and marry her? No matter how much I love her and no matter how good the sex with her is, she is not my husband and not the father of my sons. I don't want to marry her. From the very beginning of this whole nightmare, I wanted to have her as a lover, not as a partner. I promised myself that I would rather share our bed with you than share it with her. I did everything wrong. I was impatient and tried to force you to accept all this. I took something good and ruined it for no reason. As for sex, and I know you want to ask about this, sex with Darcy is different. We cuddle a little, have little conversations before bed, but nothing like the dreams you and I had. You and I dreamed about boys, their future, our future, and how we would grow old together. Darcy is so young that she's a breath of fresh air, but we're not connected on as deep a level as you and I are, or rather like we were connected before. I know last night disappointed you and I was a little disappointed too. I wanted to have sex with you. I was, and still, kind of a creep for doing this to you. It hurts me to see how you have changed towards me. I know there are a lot of women around you who would love to be in a relationship with you, and I'm scared of what will happen when you realize the power you have among women. Chuck almost choked on her words about his attractiveness and strength among women. He definitely didn't feel it in the end. She just fell asleep last night. It was more eloquent than any of her words. He told her about this. She blushed. I know it doesn't look very good. All I can say is that I was on edge after the holiday, the conversation after it, and then when we got back to the apartment, I just collapsed. Would you like to try again in the morning? I don't have much to do today. Chuck chuckled sarcastically. Perhaps if I could, I would consider this possibility. After a short pause and a sip of coffee, he continued. Perhaps I was also a little afraid that you were waiting for some sign of weakness from me so that you could attack me again, either physically or mentally. I literally compared myself to Darcy and realized that I was clearly not on the level. I didn't even need to ask if I could compare to her. I knew I was a distant second. He didn't know what to do. He felt so depressed and alone, even with her in his apartment, that he wanted to burst into tears, beat his chest, or do something violent because of her betrayal. This was the only liberation he did not allow himself. Suddenly tears streamed down his face, and he began to breathe shakily, trying to calm himself before jumping to his feet and throwing his coffee cup at the wall. Bev flinched at his outburst. Chuck left the table and disappeared into the bedroom for a good 15 minutes before he managed to pull himself together and return. He apologized for his exit. Bev tried to shrug it off, but she was scared for a few minutes. The thought flashed through her mind that perhaps Chuck could behave this way in front of boys. However, John and Jeff never talked about such cases, but she still feared for them. She suddenly imagined getting a protective order against Chuck, but quickly dismissed the thought. Depriving him of his sons might make him even more violent than he just showed. Still, she had to ask a question. Why did you just get up and leave that fateful Friday night? I know you tried to explain it to me at my parents' place that week, but I wasn't ready to listen. Back then, after admitting what I did to you to the people I least wanted to disappoint. She even clarified a little, knowing that I set this trap for you and did all this with Darcy to make it seem like you were drunk and attacked her. Why didn't you explode right then? I don't know, but maybe if you did that, I would take it positively and try to fix things on the spot. I don't know myself, Chuck answered. But when I regained consciousness, I realized that I was naked and couldn't move. I felt that someone was lying nearby, and at first I thought it was you. I was thinking about our sex life and was happy until I realized you were talking quietly to someone. When I realized what you were planning, I couldn't believe it. You were really going to deprive me of my sons, my job, my marriage, and my patent income. It was devastating. I also couldn't believe you were cheating on me, especially with a woman. And then there was the thought that you would injure your mistress and make it look like I was guilty. There was not a single positive aspect that I could see in what was happening. When you gave me more medicine to keep me still, I almost went crazy mentally. The last straw was what you did to me. I could not defend myself at any moment of this horror. When you set the plan in motion and were going to blame me, I was afraid that you would actually do it. All I could think was to run away as soon as my legs could carry me. I needed to go somewhere where I would be safe. As soon as I felt that I could somehow move, my goal was to take your phone on which you recorded all this. I needed proof of my version of events. I couldn't let you edit the post. I consider it lucky that my actions took you by surprise. Otherwise, you could easily have kept me there and taken control. The thought that you could control me so much scared me too. Did you notice that I didn't try to sleep with you last night? It was because I was afraid of being vulnerable again. I was afraid that one day I would wake up tied to a bed and you would dictate terms to me. Bev looked thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. I think I understand your point a little. I never thought that I was taking everything from you. I just wanted to scare you into letting me have my fantasy. I never thought about actually doing all of this. I certainly wasn't going to call the police if you didn't agree. Bev continued. My plan was to make you leave for a few days and then let you come back if you agreed to my terms. I never thought that it would destroy your self-esteem. I also didn't think that this would affect our sex life, because up to that point everything was fine. Everything just needed to be out in the open so we could discuss it. I tried so hard not to harm you with the medications. I followed the instructions I found online with the exact dosage for your height and weight. It never even occurred to me that I could accidentally hurt you. I also didn't realize that you were conscious and going crazy because you couldn't move. She stopped and looked closely at her husband, seeing the dark expression on his face. Oh, honey, if I knew I was hurting you, I wouldn't do it. I sincerely apologize for hurting you. He stood up. Let's go before I do something again that will force you to get a protective order against me and deprive me of my sons. He went out to the elevator and went down without waiting for her. Bev appeared a few minutes later. He took her to the car and drove straight to her house without trying to see her sons. As soon as she left, he turned around and drove away from her as quickly as possible. This time, instead of going into the forest, he headed to the bar. Chuck rolled over and groaned from the pain coming from different ends of his body. His back, his head, and his mouth ached, and it felt so dry, as if he had swallowed sand, very dry sand. The light in the room hurt my eyes. He lay on a hard surface and smelled vomit. Something hard covered his face and beard. What the hell happened? He moved his arms and legs. Okay, they were still there. One arm seemed numb. The tingling sensation was almost painful. The same thing happened with the legs. He must have collapsed on the floor in a bent position, and now he was paying for it. He groaned again, slowly straightening his legs until he hit an obstacle. He forced himself to open his eyes, but then closed them again. The light hurt too much. Finally, covering his eyes with his hand, he opened them again. Everything was blurry for longer than usual, but soon my vision returned. He was lying on the bathroom floor in a small bathroom. There wasn't enough room to stretch out on the floor without moving a little more. From this angle, the room seemed both familiar and foreign. Slowly rising, he looked around again. Now he remembered it was the bathroom in Bev's house. What the hell was he doing here? He tried to remember, but his head was pounding and he felt nauseous. He rolled onto his hands and knees. It almost turned him inside out, but he managed to hold back vomiting. He looked down and saw that he was dressed. The clothes were stained with vomit and smelled disgusting. The smell made him almost choke on vomit again. There was a quiet knock on the door, but it echoed loudly in Chuck's head, intensifying the pain. "Oh God, keep it down, please," he muttered, his own voice adding to the pain in his head. The door opened as far as the gap would allow, and Bev tried to look inside. She whispered, but to Chuck, her voice sounded like a scream. "Chuck, have you finally come to your senses? Can I get you something? Water? Pills? Anything?" Chuck tried not to nod his head, realizing that this might be a bad idea. He also whispered back, "Yes, please. Water and something for the head." "I don't care what." She closed the door, and Chuck grabbed the edge of the sink and struggled to his feet. What he saw in the mirror did not make him feel any better. He would later joke that any woman would run away in horror if she saw him like this. He slowly raised his hands to the tap, drank some water, and began to wash himself. He managed to cleanse himself a little. He then slowly took off his dirty clothes and turned on the shower. He turned the water as hot as he could stand it before stepping into the shower stall. There was a built-in seat, and he sat down, letting the water flow down his body. From time to time, he leaned back and drank the water. He felt severely dehydrated. After some time, the water began to cool. He turned off the shower before he began to shake. He managed to lather himself up and rinse everything off before the water got too cold. So at least he felt clean. Now my head didn't hurt so much anymore. He stood up with difficulty and left the shower. While he was there, Bev went into the bathroom and left a glass of water and some pills on the edge of the sink. He didn't hesitate and drank it all. He didn't care if it was painkillers, sleeping pills, or anything else. But since she didn't hurt him while he was drunk, he trusted her that she wouldn't hurt him now. Having carefully dried himself with a towel, he noted that it was time for him to shave again. Light stubble had already appeared on his face. After he dried himself off, he draped the towel over his hips and walked out of the bathroom. His goal was to find some of his things, but he came across Darcy, who was just laying out clean clothes for him. Darcy flinched when she noticed him behind her. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Endo, I didn't want to bother you, but Bev asked me to get you some clean clothes." I was again in the bedroom with an attractive woman, although she loved women and was almost naked. But her reaction was limited to fear. "Well, goodbye, male charm. He will never be a replacement for James Bond." Darcy carefully collected the dirty clothes and carefully carried them out. After she left, Chuck threw off the towel and slowly put on clean clothes. Of course, it was his, but these clothes were from the times when he weighed more, so they were too big. He found a belt and pulled up his pants so they wouldn't fall down at the wrong time. He was already embarrassed enough to get drunk and end up at his wife's house. The headache has now subsided a little and the dry mouth has eased. Chuck headed to the kitchen where he sat down at the table feeling weak. Bev and Darcy were very attentive to his condition. They quickly warmed up some soup for him from a can and placed it in front of him. Chuck was surprised at how hungry the smell of regular chicken soup made him feel. He slowly ate the entire plate. When he finished, he was finally able to ask the question of what happened and why he was at Bev's house. Bev immediately burst into tears when he called the house her home. "Darling, this house will always be yours as well as mine. We brought our children here from the hospital. Please don't call this Bev's house." Chuck nodded. "I'll try, but why am I here? I remember that yesterday I took you home and left." "It was yesterday, right? You were so angry at me when you dropped me off that I think you went straight to the bar. The bartender called me from your phone when you were already disconnected. He took the keys from you before you fell asleep. Sorry, but he called you a weakling. You only drank 4 or 5 beers in 3 or 4 hours, but it was almost impossible to get you into the car. We brought you here to look after you. All of us, including John and Jeff, had to drag you upstairs and put you in the bedroom. But then you started choking, and we realized you were going to throw up. So we moved you to the bathroom. You managed to vomit most of it into the toilet, but then you collapsed and we couldn't move you anymore. So we left you there and tried to get some sleep. It wasn't easy." Chuck thanked them for taking care of him when he was unable to take care of himself. "Believe me, I've never gotten this drunk before. Usually after 1 beer, I already start to feel slightly hopped, and I don't like beer at all. Thanks again. Now if you can, take me to my car, and I'll leave you alone to enjoy the rest of your day." He checked the time. It was around noon. Both Bev and Darcy said in unison that they would not let him go so quickly. "Your sons want to make sure you're okay," Bev said. They were very worried last night because they had never seen you in such a state. Darcy continued to express her opinion. "We believe that you are now unfit to drive. We'll take you back to your apartment later, after you've rested a little more and eaten something more substantial. In the meantime, we think you should go upstairs and go to bed." There was no way you could sleep comfortably all night on that floor. Chuck still felt bad enough not to argue, so he allowed them to take him upstairs again. They took him to the master bedroom, and he wasn't composed enough to resist as he laid down on the same bed where his allure began. Darcy left the room as Bev helped him take off his clothes. He gratefully slid under the covers and fell asleep moments later. It felt nice to stretch out on the bed, and the warm blankets were cozy and inviting. After some time, Bev climbed into his bed. "Bev, what are you doing?" "Husband, I take what's mine." Chuck didn't think. He just reacted. "Did you feel good too, dear? I mean, I snuck and attacked you in your sleep. I didn't ask if you wanted sex with me." Chuck had to admit to her that he liked it. He was just a little annoyed that she didn't try to ask his permission before seducing him. But in truth, he spent many an evening trying to convince her to do what she did this afternoon. During their marriage, she always implied that he sometimes didn't pay attention when she wanted some love. And she would never ask for hot love in the jungle where they would just fight and be cursed for each other's feelings. "I hope we can do this again sometime in the near future. But I'm afraid we might hurt each other if we try to do it too often." She slowly headed into the shower to freshen up a bit while Chuck rested again. When she left, he fell asleep again, but rested much better than before. Some people recover from hangovers, she thought. After getting dressed, Bev carefully walked down the stairs. The boys looked at her like she was some kind of alien. Bev looked at Darcy, and the young woman told her that she explained that the noise upstairs was because Bev and Chuck were celebrating their... Up to this point, the boys were very worried. Bev felt her face turn red. She really didn't want to explain everything about what adults did behind closed doors right now. But she knew that the time was quickly approaching when her sons would have to be lectured. Darcy told the boys that their father was still feeling a little unwell and would take another nap. When the boys asked their mother why she looked tired, she simply said that maybe she was a little out of shape to fight anymore. The boys laughed because she had never fought with them since they were tiny. Jeff and John went outside to play with the neighbor boys since their father was sick and couldn't play with them right now. While the boys were out of earshot, Darcy and Bev discussed sex, which Bev had instigated. Bev was happy that she was with him again. She stopped for a moment. Like I said, it was great, but there was not an ounce of love in it. Darcy knelt down next to the chair and hugged her lover. This is exactly the picture Chuck saw when he went downstairs in search of his clothes. The clothes he had put on this morning were too big, and he needed the things he had worn when he arrived here. He stopped and just watched as the lovers consoled each other. Misunderstanding the situation, he decided that Bev was looking for confirmation from Darcy that she was more important to her than him. Without saying anything, he went into the laundry room where he found his clothes. When he returned, the two women were still talking quietly and did not notice him. He went upstairs, quickly changed into his clothes, and left the house again without attracting attention. He called and got a taxi to pick him up a few blocks away. The taxi took him back to the bar where he had lost control the day before, and soon he was on his way to his apartment. The whole weekend seemed ruined with the possible exception of sex with Bev. He smiled at the memory. This was a hot episode. Even though he was still angry about what Bev did to him, he felt some of his manhood return after he had sex with her. After this rest, he felt better and more energetic. But then he began to wonder. He realized that this sex was for his pleasure. Can he hope that when they make love, she will experience as much pleasure, having lost complete control over her feelings? Since this had never happened before, he doubted it would happen when they made love and not just sex. Instead of thinking about the possible disappointment after such sex, he returned to plans for building a new house and plot. Thousands of little details had to be taken into account. Things as simple as paint colors and decisions as big as the size of bathrooms. Should I make only shower stalls or combine bathtubs? And showers, should I install a jacuzzi and separate showers? Should you use solar or wind? After all, RM Industries could afford both if he deemed it necessary. That night he had a dream in which he again had sex with his wife. God, how he loved her and how he missed her. He missed everything except the conniving bitch she had become. Somehow he would have to forgive her, but he didn't know how. His phone rang. It was an old phone, not a burner phone. Without looking, he realized it was Bev calling. When he answered, she immediately began asking where he was and what was wrong with him, how she was worried, and so on. He laughed quietly, and this interrupted her. Bev, you and Darcy were so passionate about each other that I calmly walked past, picked up my things, went upstairs, changed my clothes, and left, and you didn't even notice. I don't think you were too worried. Bev tried to explain that the conversation with Darcy was only about their relationship and what she and Chuck did in their marital bed. I was worried. I want my husband back with all his loving sides. We only talked about this. Are you mine again? Do you love me the same way I love you? Chuck still doubted what they were really talking about. But he couldn't prove it because he didn't hear anything, but saw only their concentration on each other. He decided to change tactics. Let's leave everything as it is for today, and in a few days I will contact you. How about having dinner together on Friday night? I can come and pick you and the boys up, and we can have a family evening together. And then I'll take you home and spend the rest of the weekend with the boys. Bev wanted him to come home and stay with them for the night and told him so. Please, Chuck, we started talking. Why don't you stay with us? The boys would be happy if you stayed with us today, tomorrow, and all the following days as before. Please consider coming home to us. Chuck shook his head. One night of sex, and she thinks everything is fine now. If I return, what will happen to Darcy? Will all three of us sleep in the same bed? And how do you prevent Darcy and I from ever having sex? I remember her saying that she was interested in trying it with me. And then you categorically stated that if she did this, then you would no longer be able to make love. He could almost see Bev blushing even with a distance between them. The pause showed him that she had again not thought everything through. She was only thinking about tonight and had no long-term plan, including the night's events. There was no extra bedroom in the house. He wasn't going to sleep on the couch, and Darcy probably wouldn't agree to that either. She didn't have an answer to that. She finally agreed to a family dinner on Friday, but asked him to call her every day so they could talk for a while. She did not tell him that now that he had regained his masculine strength, women would seduce him from all sides. Chuck hung up and went back to his plans for the house. Soon he would need to tell the boys about the house and the pool so they could help plan their rooms and areas. After some time, he went to a nearby diner and ate. The chicken soup he was given in the morning was not enough for long-term satiety. After dinner, he returned to his apartment and soon fell asleep. The week was pretty quiet on the family front, but things at RM and Industries made up for it. Thomas negotiated with various automobile companies. He informed Chuck that he needed to make sure his passport was in order as they would soon be traveling to several countries. Several houses were preparing to move in the near future. The realtor was making good money from all these sales and relocations to make way for the new park. On Wednesday evening, the boys reviewed the plans for the house and made changes that Chuck fully approved of. On Friday evening, the whole family discussed construction plans. Chuck brought a smaller version of the house plan with him to show Bev. She liked that her opinion was taken into account. This gave her hope that she too could move into a new house when it was ready. She also noted that the plans included several additional bedrooms. She hoped Chuck would allow Darcy to move in with them. Moreover, she suggested making the bathroom between the master and guest bedrooms or walk through so that it connects both rooms. If Darcy lives in the guest room, she will be able to easily move between rooms without going into the hallway. Chuck didn't discuss this change in front of the boys. He was against this idea, realizing that it would only give Bev the opportunity to move freely between her bedroom and her mistress's room. He felt that he would wake up alone too often. However, All plans had to be finalized by an architect and submitted to the City Planning Commission for approval, so there was still little time left. The rest of the evening went smoothly. Jeff and John were glad that their parents were together and that Dad wasn't sick this time. After dinner and a trip to the laser tag center, the boys were tired and fell asleep right on the move. Chuck called a taxi for Bev, since the drive to her house was too long to take her in the car with the children and then return back to his apartment. Bev asked him to come with her and stay the night, but he refused, citing fatigue. On Saturday, Chuck and the boys went to a lake about 2 hours away for the weekend. There was a resort on the lake that offered boat and jet ski rentals and also offered fishing charters. They had a great weekend. Around 10 o'clock on Sunday night, Bev called Chuck from the lobby of his home. During the day, there was a staff member in the building to help direct visitors. But at night, the building was locked, and the security system forced unexpected guests to request access through an intercom. So Chuck had time to pick up the newspaper he'd been reading earlier and clean up the mess before letting Bev into his apartment. When Bev appeared on the doorstep, Chuck was struck by her appearance. Her hair was pulled back into an updo, revealing her elegant neck. The makeup was flawless and the dress was subtle, highlighting her cleavage and revealing most of her breasts. The length of the dress only reached mid-thigh, making her 37-year-old body look incredibly curvy. She got down to business right away, hugging him and kissing him on the lips. "It's been a week since you had sex with me. You didn't come to me, so I came to you. I behaved badly, and I deserve to be punished," she said and pulled out a small whip from her bag. Chuck looked at her with surprise and amazement. In their 15 years of marriage, she had never given even a hint that she wanted to be spanked. Moreover, when he reminded her of this episode, Bev blushed a little. I know. It was a different time then, and I still don't like pain, but today I behaved badly. And in general, I've been very bad lately. You had no way to take revenge and make me pay for the pain you caused. I'm ready to be punished for what I did. And what did you do that was so bad today? Why right now are you ready to experience pain for your actions? Chuck raised an eyebrow and muttered quietly, "What a witch, she's always trying to control everything even now." Chuck did his job and then pushed her out the door. Without giving her time to say anything, he forcefully slammed the door in her face. Chuck then turned off the light and went into the bedroom while Bev knocked on the door and begged him to let her in. He heard her say that she was going to stay the night with him, but he didn't care. After some time, he heard the police appear outside the neighbors call them after hearing the noise. Chuck slept peacefully that night. The next evening, Chuck called Bev as she had requested to chat. As soon as she started complaining about how he rudely exposed her after their sex session, he immediately hung up. An hour later, he himself called her again and said that if they ever wanted to return to their life together, then she would have to accept the changes. Bev tried to throw a tantrum, but he hung up again. On Tuesday, he called her again. This time, she was more reserved, and they talked about boys and Chuck's upcoming trip abroad. He told her that he quit his job because plans to build a house and a swimming pool, as well as a project related to his invention, were taking up too much time. Bev, not knowing how much RM Industries was actually worth, became concerned about how Chuck would live on. For the first time in a long time, she cared about something other than herself. When he calmed her down and told her that money wouldn't be a problem, she still lost control and exploded, and he hung up the phone again. This time she called him back and apologized for her breakdown. She again suggested that he return home so that his expenses would be less. Chuck laughed quietly at the suggestion and replied, "No, not right now." On Wednesday after her work, he called her and invited her to have dinner with the boys at some restaurant and then spend the evening at her house to feel like family. She happily agreed, but suggested changing plans and having a family dinner at home. Dinner that night was actually a success, except that Chuck was still uncomfortable with Darcy's presence at the table. The boys now saw her as part of the family, although they still thought she was their nanny. As for Chuck, it seemed to him that the conversation was constrained since there was a stranger among them. Although as he thought about it, he realized that perhaps it was his presence that was holding everyone back. After all, he had not sat at this table for many months. After dinner, the boys started doing their homework, and all three adults helped them, turning it into a kind of game. All the adults quickly came up with a point system in which the boys could earn points for correct answers. The main prize was a trip to the laser tag center, where the winner could take a friend with him. Homework moved quickly as Jeff and John competed, trying to outdo each other, although they both knew they would win in the end. An hour later, both finished their task, and John won by a small margin. He screamed happily and started jumping up and down, announcing that his friend Nathan would be delighted since he rarely gets to go to such events. The adults quickly discussed the situation in private and came back with a proposal. If all the homework was done correctly and quickly over the next few weeks, they could invite all their friends to a laser tag party. The boys were absolutely delighted. Getting them to sleep after all this fun proved to be a difficult task, but soon they were under the blankets. Bev and Darcy relaxed on the sofa, and Chuck took his favorite chair. For a few minutes in silence, they discussed the previous evening and Jeff's upcoming birthday. Chuck admitted that Jeff was old enough for a party with inflatable rides to be of no interest to him. They toyed with different ideas until they settled on visiting a bowling alley with mini golf. You could order a cake there, and the establishment would offer ice cream. If someone wants to grab a bite to eat, they could order food from a local snack bar. The birthday plans were sorted out, and Chuck moved on to discussing his immediate plans. RM Industries was looking to expand the fund by adding funds to build shelters for victims of domestic violence and fund counseling. The company also planned to create a fund to support parents who lost rights to their children due to unfair court decisions. A thorough investigation will be conducted to ensure the fairness of the cases presented. Chuck emphasized that he does not intend to help irresponsible parents who abandon their children or those who could potentially harm them. He was particularly interested in supporting those suffering due to the justice system. Although he understood that such problems most often affected men, there would be no prior discrimination based on gender. Bev was still worried about Chuck's financial well-being and whether RM Industries would be able to pay him enough to live comfortably. Chuck assured her that he wouldn't have any problems with money. He reminded her that he was building a new house, but she reminded him that he would not be the owner of the house, but only a tenant. He smiled and agreed with her, although she didn't know all the details. Chuck was still trying to hide the real value of the company and his position from her. Bev again asked him to come home so they could live as a family. He did not want to get into an argument that evening, but said that he still had issues that were not resolved and that he needed time. When the conversation turned to his upcoming trips, Chuck explained that he and Thomas Wilkes were going to visit a manufacturing plant in South Carolina where the first devices would be produced. After that, they will head to China, which is bidding for production rights and plans to use the device in its cars. Then they will travel to Japan and South Korea. After returning to the US, they will spend a few weeks before flying to the UK, France, Italy, and Germany. If everything goes well, then within 5 years, most of the automobile companies exporting cars to the United States will be using his invention. He explained that RM Industries derives most of its profits from the production of these devices, which helps reduce the tax burden and product liability risk. He receives a salary sufficient to live on, and the company takes on all the risks. He didn't tell them that he was the only employee of the company at the moment. Chuck knew that soon he would have to hire staff, and the company would begin to need a real office, not just a mailbox. All this was in the immediate plans. Bev was impressed by how important Chuck was to RM Industries. She used to think it was a big corporation that would just take his invention and pay him pennies for his efforts. Now Chuck seemed to her confident in his future and financial well-being. As Chuck prepared to leave, Bev invited him to stay the night. They walked out to the front door. Darcy remained in the living room and could hear their conversations but could not distinguish the words. Chuck asked Bev what the sleeping arrangements would be. There was no guest bedroom in the house. Their bed was only a queen size, which isn't big enough for 3 adults. especially if one of them is out of reach. He said that he was not going to sleep on the sofa, while his legal wife and her mistress slept in bed. Bev tried to convince him that spending the night would be no problem. She bought silk pajamas for all three of them and trusted that Chuck wouldn't try anything with Darcy despite her attractiveness. He laughed, reminding him that her plan to blackmail him and bend him to his will was based on the fact that he was allegedly attracted to Darcy. Bev at least managed to feign guilt when he reminded her how it all started. He kissed her and went back to his lonely apartment. He wanted to stay, but as he told both women, he still had unresolved issues. One of them was that Bev continued to sleep with her mistress. On Thursday, everything went according to the same pattern as on Monday and Tuesday. Chuck called Bev, and she asked again when he would be home. He couldn't give an exact answer. Later, she herself came to his apartment. This time, instead of trying to seduce him, she sat on the couch and asked to talk. When Chuck agreed, she immediately started talking about how he needed to come home. Chuck shook his head and asked a simple question. "Why is this so important to you?" "I provide the boys with everything they need and have saved money for their education. They have nothing to worry about. I give you money every week to maintain the house. You have a lover who sleeps in the same bed with you every night. You can have sex whenever you want. You earn enough to pay your bills and mortgage. I now own the mortgage. So if you are in financial difficulty, I can be merciful and give you a respite. So I'll ask again, why is it so important to you that I come home?" Bev looked like she was about to cry, probably because I love you and miss you. You have no idea how often I want to talk to you. In the evenings, but you are not around. We barely talk on the phone. And before I asked you to call, you hadn't talked to me at all for weeks. It felt like you had completely cut me out of your life. She raised her hand to stop his objections. I know it's all my fault, but you have to admit that I'm trying to make things right by any means necessary. You haven't demanded it yet. But if you insist that I send Darcy away, I will. It will kill me and maybe her too. But I'm ready. I will do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness. She took a deep breath. I understand that the agreement that I signed that Monday after what I did to you on Friday deprives me of rights to all common property. I also understand that you can use the video to ruin me and my career. If we divorce, you will get custody of the boys, and I admit it. But that's not the reason I want you to come home to me and the boys. I really love you, and I hate that you are going through all this. But I feel that if you don't come back, we will never be able to return to what we had before I committed this terrible act. She paused to watch his reaction, and then continued. You told me recently that everything I do is selfish and only for me. This may be true. After you hung up the phone a few times, I had to sit down and try to understand where you were coming from. I think I see your point. A few weeks ago, Darcy came to you and talked to you. Nobody asked for your opinion. You came to John's birthday, and I tried to seduce. You didn't consent. You didn't even sleep in your own bed because I was there. Then the next day came. I kept telling you what I wanted until you snapped and took me home. After that, you went and got drunk. The only thing in my defense is that Darcy and I didn't hesitate to come pick you up from the bar and take you home. We tried to make you comfortable until you started to feel sick. We moved you to the bathroom, but you passed out there and we couldn't move you. You were too heavy for us. We left you sleeping on the bathroom floor. I know you won't believe it, but we were both so worried about you that we didn't even kiss that night. We took turns checking on you all night, so I knew when you started moving the next morning. I tried to help you with painkillers and water. Later, I really lashed out at you, and I think you thought it was just for my sake. Yes, I enjoyed it because I missed you, but I also felt like I had to do this for you. I felt like I owed you this, and I wanted to prove that there was nothing wrong with your masculinity. If that meant taking you by surprise in your sleep, so be it. I wanted you to feel good. Then there was Sunday evening when I showed up unannounced. I admit that some of my actions were selfish, but I also wanted you to feel the satisfaction of receiving some kind of compensation. I don't like pain, especially when it's inflicted on me, but I wanted you to inflict it on me. I wanted you to let go of some of your anger, and you did. Yes, it was a little selfish, but I wanted to stay with you for the night. I wanted to fall asleep in your arms and wake up in the morning next to you, feeling your morning scent. I didn't care if we made love or just had sex again. I just wanted to be close to you. And then you pushed me out the door and didn't answer my pleas. When the police arrived, I thought it was you who called them. I was shocked that you had brought the police into our lives again. When they said the neighbors called them, I was mad at you because you didn't even try to find out what was going on. But I stopped in time and went home. Chuck asked with a sad and slightly embarrassed expression on his face. What about the time I came downstairs that Sunday, and you and Darcy were so engrossed in each other that you didn't even notice me walk past you, pack up, and leave? Bev shook her head. We discussed what I did. I was happy, but upset that there was no love in it, only lust and possibly anger on your part. Darcy tried to calm me down, but I was already beginning to think that this was our last night together. I thought that this was the end, that we would never be in bed together again. And this sex was only because of your anger. I provoked you to take over. I never meant what I said, but I know you don't believe it. The more I try to fix everything, the less likely it is to, Bev added sadly. Chuck nodded, agreeing with her words. Again, there is not a single question about what I want or what I need. It all comes down to what you think I need. You decided that I should come home so that everything would be fixed. But until tonight, you didn't even ask what I needed to heal. Like I said, everything you do revolves around how you can get everything you want without questioning what I want. Chuck paused for a moment to see how she would take his words, and then continued. You asked me how I would live without my old job. I think it's more about whether I can continue to help you and the boys if I don't work. You never supported my efforts with the invention until it became obvious that it would be successful and make money. The only thing you were thinking about was how to gain control of the money when you framed the accusation. You say that you didn't want me to leave, but at the same time you strive to keep me under your control and dictate the terms of my life. The fact that you asked me to stay yesterday without a plan for sleeping arrangements only confirms that you want me under your control. And you are annoyed that I can go to my apartment and come back whenever I want. Bev shook her head as if she didn't believe what she was hearing, and then said quietly, I don't want you to be lonely. Every time you return to your apartment, I worry when you will start looking for a replacement for me. You always say that no woman would want to be with you, but I know that is not true. Once you decide to start looking, you will find hundreds of women who want to be with you, who will be willing to die to sleep with you. There will be more women than you can count who will want you in their life forever. Throw in a couple of boys, and single mothers will be banging on your door every night, offering anything to win you over. You are a good person, and women like this want good men like you. You think good guys always lose, but they don't. I just want you to give me a chance. Tell me, what can I do to start the healing process? Chuck was silent for a moment, as if collecting his thoughts, then replied, I thought about this a lot. I was going through different options in my head about what we could do to fix this. I've thought about seeing a therapist, but I'm not sure the therapist would agree that I've been harmed. Nowadays, people might say that I am wrong and that I need to accept a polyamorous marriage. I can't handle it, and I don't want any stranger telling me that I'm going too far. He sighed and continued. I was also thinking about having an affair with someone random. Maybe you're right, and it's not about my masculinity yet, but in my mind, it's just like that. Imagine how you would feel. How would this affect your self-esteem? Wouldn't you doubt that you could attract someone again if the one you loved the most did such a thing? Be honest, Bev. Bev was shocked by his words, her voice shaking when she finally answered. It would be terrible. I wouldn't be able to cope with it. What can I do to make you whole again? What kind of sex do you want? I'm ready to do whatever you say. Do you want me to tattoo myself with something obscene? What should I do? Chuck hesitated for a moment, and Bev realized that he had an idea, but she might not like it. Okay, if you insist, he said slowly. I thought about this for a long time. It might not help, and it might be the last thing we ever do together. That's why I warn you in advance. I keep coming back to the idea that I wish you could go through what you did to me so that you find yourself completely helpless, aware of what is happening, but unable to move or speak, unable to convey your sensations in any way, to have you completely at my mercy and then to be humiliated. Bev had a look of horror on her face. She couldn't believe. Finally, she stood up and left without saying goodbye. Friday night, Chuck called and spoke to the boys, but his conversation with Bev was short. She said she had a headache and hung up. The same thing happened on Saturday. He talked to the boys for a while, but they soon said goodbye, as they were going to visit their grandparents for the night. Chuck shrugged and hung up. Bev didn't even pick up the phone to say hello. On Sunday, he didn't even call. He planned to talk to the boys on Wednesday night. And if Bev didn't want to talk, there wasn't much point in calling her. The boys were with him on Wednesday evening. He prepared dinner, and the boys helped as best they could. As Chuck learned to cook more complex dishes, he began teaching them the basics of cooking, starting with how to boil water for pasta. Dinner was great, followed by homework before taking them back to their grandparents at 9 p.m. He was surprised that Bev didn't come to pick them up. On Thursday evening, he was surprised when Bev called him herself. He no longer used the temporary phone because he was no longer trying to avoid her calls. After not hearing from her for a week, he was startled when she called. She didn't sound very excited when he answered. She got straight to the point. "Chuck, I've thought about this a lot. When I didn't want to talk to you, I actually had a migraine. I was only able to teach a couple of days this week because I was too sick from what I was thinking. Darcy and I discussed this endlessly, but I finally made a decision." She fell silent, and Chuck thought she was finally ready to end their relationship. Perhaps she had come to the conclusion that he would never be able to get over it. He was surprised by her next comment. "I'm going to get some more of that same drug from my friend, and we need to agree on when you can do whatever you want to me. We'll have to make some rules, but I don't see how you'll come home if we don't. Can you plan this for one of the Fridays and Saturdays soon?" Chuck was stunned. She offered him her life so that he could see if she would experience the same feelings as him. Now it was his turn to be silent. Finally, he broke the silence. He could only imagine how Bev was feeling right now. "Listen, Bev, this is a serious conversation, and I don't think it's appropriate to have it over the phone. Are the boys already asleep?" When she answered in the affirmative, he continued, "Why don't I come over to your place and the three of us can talk about it and set rules so that if anything needs to be changed, we can do it before any of this?" Bev agreed, and he immediately went to their house. When he arrived, Bev already had coffee ready for him in case he didn't want something stronger. He gave up alcohol. It wasn't surprising that he got drunk so quickly last time. He rarely drank at all. One beer was enough to make him feel dizzy, and this evening he needed to be sober as a glass to discuss all the details. He took a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. Bev sat opposite him and Darcy sat on the other side. Usually the table had an insert that made it rectangular, but this evening it was square so that no one would dominate the table. Chuck started the conversation by suggesting they recreate everything on Friday night, just like that night. He also noted that he did not feel comfortable using any medications on Bev. He didn't want to jeopardize her life. "If we fix your hands next to your body, as we did with me, will you be able to not move under any circumstances? If so, I suggest that you only be partially immobilized." While they were writing down the rules, Chuck issued another challenge. "I want to recreate everything from the moment I came to my senses. This means I will mark Darcy and abuse you. I will say that I will take the children and ruin your life if you do not give in to blackmail as you did." Bev nodded in agreement. Darcy wasn't sure about all this. It hurt that time. "Do you have to do this again?" Chuck said it was part of her punishment since she was part of the conspiracy. Darcy didn't like it, but she endured it in silence. Chuck concluded his demands with a simple comment. "If everything goes like that night, if you, Bev, don't move or stop me at any stage, if Darcy participates fully as he did then I promise to return home immediately after this, unless you yourself change your mind." Chuck paused before making his final demand. "But if at any time, Bev, you say a word or do something that shows that you no longer want to continue this, then it ends immediately. I'll get dressed, leave, and file for divorce on Monday." This will be a tough test for you because you won't be medicated like I was. There will be no safe words because I didn't have the opportunity to tell you what I was thinking and feeling that night. So you shouldn't have that privilege either. He told them both that they should think carefully about Bev's proposal. This could be a complete disaster and damage all three of them forever. For now, it was only his cross. I'm leaving for China in 2 weeks. If we do this, I suggest we do it on the Friday evening before I leave. Thomas and I are flying out on Sunday morning. Everything will be over, and we will all have time to decide what will happen next. Will I return home, or will we part forever? I bid you farewell, lady, and will await your decision. And so it happened. On Thursday, after Bev hadn't called him since their conversation, she called and told Chuck that the boys would be at her parents' house the following weekend, and that he was expected at the house at 8 o'clock in the evening. There was no point in waiting any longer. They also agreed to the established rules. Bev even thanked Chuck for not wanting to use the medicine. The thought of being completely immobilized scared her. Chuck wondered if he had made the right decision in abandoning this part of the plan. But now it was too late to change anything. He then received an email containing a full description of what was about to happen, signed by both Bev and Darcy. On the night of the below retest, Chuck carefully shaved, leaving only a goatee, and took a thorough shower. He did not use cologne so that the smell would be as subtle as possible. At this time, Bev was also getting ready. For some reason, Darcy had shown less affection towards Bev in recent days since the ritual had been suggested. She didn't tell Bev, but she didn't really want to be involved the first time, and she wanted it even less now. Since it wasn't a full reenactment of that night, Bev and Chuck weren't going to have dinner together. Bev and Darcy ate a light dinner to better prepare for the upcoming challenge. Chuck did the same. He hadn't been particularly hungry since they made that decision. In the afternoon, he took a long walk for physical activity. He arrived at the house exactly at 8 as agreed. He knocked on his own door and was let in. The three sat in the living room for a while, quickly discussing the rules that had been established. When everyone felt as comfortable as possible with what had been agreed upon, Bev asked where the whole process began. Chuck replied that Bev had to be immobilized first, so she had to take off her clothes first. Then the three of them went upstairs to get down to business. Chuck leaned close to her ear and whispered that he loved her, and hoped that this evening would help all three of them. Not just him. She nodded in agreement. She tried very hard not to make a sound. They carried out their plan that night with precision. Chuck stood still and silently watched what was happening. He was pleased his revenge was accomplished. But oddly enough, despite the victory, there was no relief inside, no sense of completion. He understood that revenge would not return to him what was lost, would not heal his wounds. Darcy turned to Bev and tried to hug her, but she pushed her away. Chuck realized he might have crossed the line, but now was no time for regrets. Bev, trying to hold back her tears, struggled to her feet and slowly walked towards the door. Her body was exhausted, her mind was in confusion, and her soul was crushed. When Chuck felt the moment drawing to a close, he said quietly, "It's over. You can say that we are equal. Now we both know what it's like to be betrayed by the ones you love the most." His words hung in the air. Bev looked at him silently, her eyes filled with pain and fatigue. Darcy stood nearby, no longer knowing how to react. "You bastard," she whined, turning to Chuck. "You knew I couldn't touch her again, knowing. You ruined it for me. You slept with her. Didn't you? Admit it, this was your last revenge." Chuck just shrugged. "Are you sure?" "You'll never know for sure." Chuck just shrugged. "Are you sure?" "You'll never know for sure." "Did I sleep with her or not? Was this part of our rules for the evening? How can you be absolutely—" "I'm sure Darcy will assure you that didn't happen, but will you believe her?" Darcy, as per the script, immediately tried to convince Bev. "Chuck is telling the truth. I swear he didn't touch me. Please believe me." But Bev was so confused and furious that she didn't even listen. She rushed to the camera and began to look through the recording, hoping to find confirmation of her suspicions in it. Of course, the video didn't provide clear evidence of what she was looking for, which only made her more worried. She looked desperately at Darcy, who tried to hug her, but Bev pulled back sharply. Darcy carefully approached Bev, trying to calm her down. Chuck stood to the side, watching the scene unfold. When Darcy hugged her, Bev calmed down a little, but her face still showed pain and disappointment. She looked at Chuck and spoke in a trembling voice. "You thought of everything down to the smallest detail, right? You wanted me to understand what you went through, and you achieved that. You made me feel pain, humiliation, and fear of losing the one I love. I wanted this evening to be our point of reconciliation so that we could start anew. I dreamed that the three of us would become a family again. But now that it's all over, I'm not sure it's possible. You destroyed everything I tried to build." Her voice trembled, and she burst into tears again, burying herself in Darcy's shoulder. Darcy stroked her hair, trying to calm her down, but she looked lost. Chuck silently watched what was happening, trying to digest everything. Then Bev, trying to control herself, added with a heavy sigh, "I really wanted to end this evening with love. I wanted to tell you that I'm pregnant. I found out about this recently. After you came back to me the day we made love, I became pregnant. You will become a father again." Chuck froze in place, unable to believe his ears. His first reaction was suspicious. Could it be true? But deep down he knew that the child was truly his. He could only nod at a loss for words and slowly left the house, leaving Bev and Darcy alone. 5 years have passed. Chuck returned home from work. Their home and the park they built together became a haven for their family and local children. Life has changed, but in some ways it has become better. Chuck was 45, still in good shape and still attractive. The eldest sons, Jeff and John, were growing up. Jeff was almost 15 and John had recently turned 13. And little Angie, a 4-year-old girl, was his favorite. She, like her mother, was smart and active. Every day when he came home, she met him on the threshold with joyful cries. "Dad, did you bring me anything?" "No, baby, just yourself." "Is this enough?" "Yes, Dad, you are the best," she answered with a smile, jumping into her father's arms. Bev left the room and kissed him, whispering in his ear, "Darcy called today. She wants you to meet her new boyfriend. He wasn't sure at Ralph first, but now he's interested in trying to make love to you the way you like to do it." Chuck chuckled. It was a joke that Bev made to herself from time to time. "Only in your dreams," he replied with a slight grin, kissing her back. "Now let me go and get myself cleaned up." Over time, Chuck and Bev's relationship began to gradually change. Their union, which once teetered on the brink of rupture, has found its balance, a kind of compromise. Bev continued her affair with Darcy, but it was no longer a sensitive topic for Chuck. Now he perceived it as part of their life together, although with internal resistance. Returning home after meetings with Darcy, Bev always returned to her husband in their shared bed, and this moment became a kind of ritual of reconciliation for them. Every time she entered the bedroom, the room seemed to be filled again with the atmosphere of a quiet but tense world. They didn't talk about it directly anymore, but there was more understanding in the silence than in words. Darcy gradually lost the importance that she had previously had in their lives. Their connection became more friendly, less passionate, as if time itself had set priorities and allowed all three to breathe more freely. When Darcy one day decided to move to another city, it was not a tragedy, for the farewell was calm, even a little indifferent, as if they all knew that their paths should diverge this way. Chuck was surprised at how easily he took the event. No anger, no jealousy, no bitterness, just a slight feeling of relief, as if one of the knots that held their lives in tension had been severed painlessly. The return to family life for Chuck was smooth, but not without certain conditions. Although on the outside, everything looked like everything was fine, inside he always remained cautious. He couldn't afford to be completely careless. Chuck learned to trust Bev again, but it was a conditional trust, like a fragile contract that could be broken at the slightest deviation. He kept all financial matters under control, as if it were his last bastion of stability. Every bill, every expense passed through his hands. He wasn't going to let anyone, not even Bev, disturb the fragile peace they'd managed to build. But behind the outer facade of their lives, there was hidden this quiet, not always noticeable tension. No matter how hard they tried to return to normal life, this compromise forever left a mark on their relationship. Chuck knew that if there was ever a threat to him or his children, he would be ready to take action. He wasn't going to be vulnerable anymore. However, life went on as usual. The children grew up. The house was still filled with their laughter and noise. Sometimes, sitting on the porch in the evening with a cup of coffee, Chuck caught himself thinking that, despite everything, they managed. Perhaps their relationship would never again be the same as it once was, but now they were connected by something else: experience. Past storms, a quiet but persistent affection for each other. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.